A biker saw a poor single mom returning her baby's formula. What he did next changed everything. This story will surprise you. Before I continue, let me know in the comments which city and country you are watching from so that I can thank you personally. It was just after 5 in the evening, but winter had already pulled the daylight out of the sky. The large grocery store glowed under harsh white lights, warm on the inside, unforgiving on the outside. Shoppers moved quickly, carts rattling, voices blending into a dull hum. Near the entrance, a young woman walked slowly, as if each step required permission. Her coat was too thin for the season, its fabric worn smooth at the elbows. A faded scarf was wrapped tightly around her neck, frayed ends tucked in carefully, as though pride still mattered. In her arms, bundled in a pale pink blanket, was her baby. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper. "It's okay," the woman whispered instantly, pulling the child closer to her chest. "Just a little longer." Her voice was calm, but her eyes told a different story. Tired, guarded, alert. The kind of eyes that had learned not to expect help. She pushed a cart slowly down the aisle, choosing each item with precision. No extras, no comfort foods. A loaf of store-brand bread, a small bag of discounted apples, bruised but edible. Instant oatmeal, the cheapest one. She paused after every item, mentally adding numbers, subtracting, recalculating. Then she reached the aisle she had been dreading. Baby formula. Rows of cans lined the shelves, bright labels promising strength, growth, comfort. Her gaze moved past most of them and stopped on one specific brand. Hypoallergenic. Doctor recommended. The only one her baby could tolerate without breaking out in painful rashes. She already knew the price. Still, she looked. $41.99. Her breath caught. She glanced down at her baby, whose tiny fingers had slipped out from the blanket, curling and uncurling in the air. The woman gently tucked them back in, her thumb brushing over soft skin. Her hand hovered over the can. "Maybe if I put something back," she thought. "The bread, the apples." But even as the idea formed, she knew it wouldn't work. She had $23. Her shoulders sagged slightly, but she straightened again. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she lifted the can and placed it into her cart anyway, like someone postponing bad news. At the checkout, she unloaded her items one by one. The cashier, a teenage girl chewing gum, barely looked up. The total flashed on the screen. The woman opened her wallet. Inside were a few crumpled bills and loose coins. She laid everything on the counter carefully, as if order might change the outcome. "I only have 23, she said quietly. "I'll need to put the formula back." The cashier didn't respond. She simply reached out, took the can, and slid it away. A man in line behind her sighed loudly. The sound burned more than words ever could. The woman's cheeks flushed. She didn't look back. Instead, she leaned down and kissed her baby's forehead. "It's okay," she whispered, forcing a small smile. "Mommy's here." She paid for what she could afford, barely half of what she had picked, and pushed the cart away quickly, her posture folding inward as though she were trying to disappear. Outside, the cold hit immediately. Snow fell steadily, thick flakes swirling under the parking lot lights. She stopped near the bus shelter, shifting the grocery bag to one arm while rocking her baby with the other. The wind cut through her coat, but she didn't move. The bus hadn't arrived yet. Inside the store, near the end of the checkout lanes, a man stood watching. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black leather biker jacket worn smooth by years of use. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes followed the woman as she stepped into the snow. Beside him, sitting in the child's seat of a cart, was his young daughter. She swung her legs gently, a juice box clutched in her hands. "Daddy," she said softly, tugging on his sleeve. He looked down. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Why did that lady give the baby's milk back?" He didn't answer right away. He had seen the way the woman counted her money, the way she held herself together when the can was taken from her, the way she never asked, never pleaded. Something tight settled in his chest. His daughter looked up at him again, her voice smaller now. "Is the baby going to be hungry?" That did it. The man inhaled slowly, the air feeling heavier than it should have. Memories stirred, ones he had packed away neatly, labeled and untouched for years. Loss. Silence. The moments when help didn't come. He looked back toward the doors where the woman stood rocking her baby in the snow. "No," he said quietly, more to himself than to his daughter. "She's not." The girl smiled, satisfied, and leaned against him. The man's grip tightened on the cart handle. He had no idea who that woman was. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. That moment, right there in that store, was not going to end the way it had begun. Inside the store, everything continued as normal. Scanners beeped, carts rolled past, conversations rose and fell without meaning. But for the man in the leather jacket, the world had narrowed to one place: the glass doors at the front of the store. Beyond them, snow fell harder now. The woman stood beneath the small bus shelter, her body angled against the wind, both arms wrapped tightly around her baby. She rocked gently, whispering something only the child could hear. The cold bit through her coat, but she didn't move. Beside him, his daughter tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, "she's still there." He nodded slowly. "I know." He closed his eyes for a brief second. Inside his chest, something pressed hard, an old feeling he thought he had buried years ago. He had learned how to walk past things, how to keep moving, how to mind his own business. But tonight, walking away felt heavier than stepping in. He turned the cart sharply. His daughter looked up, surprised. "Where are we going?" "To fix something," he said quietly. They moved down the aisle she had just left. The shelf looked untouched, as if nothing had happened, but he knew better. One can sat slightly forward, alone among the others. The formula. He picked it up without hesitation. Then he kept going. He passed a rack of children's winter gear and stopped, reaching for a pair of small fleece-lined mittens. He added them to the cart. At the bakery, he grabbed a pack of soft dinner rolls, still warm. From the hot food section, he added a container of chicken noodle soup. His daughter watched carefully. "Is that all for the baby?" she asked. He met her eyes. "For the baby. And the mom." She smiled. "Good." At the register, he placed everything on the counter. He paid in cash and waved away the change without looking at the amount. The brown paper bag felt heavier in his hands than it should have, like it carried more than food. The automatic doors opened, and the cold rushed in. He lifted his daughter into one arm, shielding her with his jacket as he crossed the parking lot. Snow crunched under his boots. He scanned the bus stop and found her immediately. She stood with her head bowed, her breath visible in the air, rocking the baby back and forth. He stopped a few feet away. "Excuse me," he said gently. she startled, instinctively pulling the baby closer, her body tensing. "Yes?" she asked cautiously. He held out the bag. "I think you left this." She stared at it, confused. Then she shook her head. "No, that's not mine." He didn't lower his hand. "It is now." Her jaw tightened. "I can't take this." "It's not charity," he said quietly. She hesitated. "It's understanding," he added, "from one parent to another." Her eyes filled despite her effort to stop it. She looked away, swallowing hard. Before she could respond, his daughter peeked out from under his arm. "You're the baby's mommy, right?" the little girl said brightly. "I saw you inside." The woman looked down, startled by the child's voice. "You hold her like this," the girl continued, copying the gentle rocking motion. "My mommy used to do that too." That was it. The woman pressed her hand to her mouth, turning slightly away. Her shoulders shook once. After a long moment, she reached out with trembling fingers and took the bag. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know how to say." "You don't have to," he replied softly. Snowflakes collected on their coats as they stood in silence. The baby had stopped fussing, warm and calm against her mother's chest. The woman glanced down the road. The bus still hadn't come. "Where do you live?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maple Street, near 5th. It's about a mile." He nodded. "Let me drive you." She shook her head immediately. "No, I can't." "You're not asking," he said calmly. "I'm offering." She looked down at her baby, then at his daughter, whose eyes were heavy with sleep but still kind. "For her," the woman said quietly. "Just for her." He nodded once. "Of course." They walked toward his SUV. The snow erased their footprints almost as soon as they made them. The woman held the bag close to her chest like something fragile, something precious. That night, the cold didn't feel quite as sharp. Something had already changed. The SUV moved quietly through the snow-covered streets. The heater hummed softly, warm air fogging the edges of the windows. In the back seat, the woman sat holding her baby close, her arms still tense, as if the safety could vanish at any moment. In the front seat, the man's daughter drifted in and out of sleep, her head tilted against the seat, curls damp from melted snow. No one spoke. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that allowed breathing again. After a few minutes, the car slowed and pulled up in front of an aging brick building. The exterior lights flickered weakly, casting uneven shadows along cracked steps and rusted railings. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't welcoming either. It simply was. "This is it," the woman said quietly. She stepped out first, balancing the paper bag in one arm and the baby in the other. The man lifted his daughter and followed her toward the entrance. Snow continued to fall, softer now, settling into the night. Inside, the stairwell was narrow but clean. Each step creaked beneath their weight. On the 3rd floor, the woman stopped, pulled out her keys, and unlocked a faded green door. The apartment was small, but it was warm. A faint scent of soap and something floral lingered in the air. A single lamp cast a gentle glow across the room. Second-hand furniture sat neatly arranged, worn but cared for. A patched quilt was folded carefully over the couch, its mismatched squares stitched together with patience. Near the wall, a plastic bin held homemade toys, cars made from bottle caps, a tunnel crafted from paper towel rolls, yarn-tied puppets. The woman gently laid her baby on a blanket on the floor. The child immediately kicked her legs, cooing softly, completely at ease. The man's daughter knelt beside her, eyes wide. "She's so tiny," she whispered, as if loud words weren't allowed here. The woman smiled for the first time that night, a small, genuine smile. "Yes," she said softly, "she is." The two children faced each other on the floor, one just beginning life, the other already learning kindness. The man scanned the room slowly. There was poverty here, that much was clear. But there was no neglect, no chaos. Everything had been arranged with care, with intention. It was a place built on effort rather than ease. His eyes caught on a framed photograph hanging above the couch, a black and white portrait of a young soldier in uniform, strong jaw, steady eyes. The frame was simple, almost humble. Before he could ask, the woman spoke. "My grandfather," she said quietly, following his gaze. "He raised me after my parents passed." The man nodded. "He looks strong." She smiled faintly. "He was." She moved toward the kitchen area, hesitating slightly. "Would you like some cocoa? I always keep a little, for nights like this." He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." Minutes later, they sat on opposite ends of the couch, each holding a mismatched mug. The cocoa was thin, but hot, warming his hands. For a while, neither spoke. Then the woman broke the silence. "I was in college," she said, staring into her cup. "I had plans. Then I got pregnant. The father wasn't ready. My scholarship was pulled. My grandfather passed not long after." She paused, swallowing. "I took whatever work I could, cashier, waitress, babysitting, anything." He listened without interrupting. "I don't like asking for help," she added quietly. "I know," he said. "That much is clear." Across the room, his daughter lay on her stomach, making silly faces at the baby, who squealed with delight. The sound filled the apartment, light and real. The woman watched them, something softening in her expression. "They seem to like each other," she said. He smiled faintly. "Looks that way." The man felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. He had spent years building his life around structure and control. But in this small apartment, stitched quilts, handmade toys, laughter born from nothing, he felt present in a way he hadn't in a long time. He stood slowly. "We should go." The woman nodded, though reluctance flickered briefly in her eyes. At the door, she hesitated. "Tonight, if you hadn't—" She stopped herself. He shook his head gently. "You're stronger than you think. This was just a moment." She looked down, then back up. "Still, thank you." They stepped into the hallway. The door closed softly behind them. As they descended the stairs, his daughter murmured sleepily, "Daddy, can we come back?" He paused, just for a second. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe this is only the beginning." Upstairs, in the small apartment, the woman stood alone for a moment. Then she exhaled, deeply, for the first time in days. For the first time, life hadn't walked past her. The night had settled deep by the time the man pulled into his driveway. Snow clung to the edges of the garage, thin and stubborn. He shut off the engine but stayed seated for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, his thoughts still somewhere else, somewhere small, warm, and stitched together with care. In the back seat, his daughter slept soundly, her cheek pressed against the window. He lifted her gently, carried her inside, and tucked her into bed. She stirred only once. "Night, Daddy," she murmured. "Good night, sweetheart." Downstairs, the house felt larger than usual, quieter. He poured himself a glass of water, took one sip, then set it aside untouched. His eyes drifted to the hallway closet. Without fully deciding to, he walked over and pulled down a cedar box from the top shelf. The lid creaked softly as he opened it. Inside were memories he rarely revisited. Old photographs, medals, folded letters tied with string. He picked up one envelope. The paper was yellowed, edges worn thin by time. He unfolded it carefully. The date at the top read August 2004. His eyes moved slowly across the words. The convoy was hit. I was pinned under twisted metal, bleeding, thinking it was over. Then someone pulled me out. A young soldier, strong, silent, brave beyond reason. His name was Sergeant Whitmore. He saved my life. The man's throat tightened. If I don't make it home, tell my son there are people who risk everything for strangers, and we never forget them. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter back up. Suddenly, a memory snapped into focus. The apartment, the patched quilt, and the photograph above the couch. He reached for his phone, scrolling quickly until he found the image he'd taken without thinking. A simple snapshot of the room, captured absent-mindedly. There it was. The same face. The same steady eyes. The same name beneath the frame. Sergeant Whitmore. The realization hit hard and fast. The woman. The struggling mother. She was his granddaughter. He sat back heavily in the chair, staring at the photograph on his phone, then at the letter in his hand. Time seemed to fold inward, pulling past and present into the same breath. She didn't know, he whispered to the empty room. This wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't charity anymore. This was a debt, one that money alone couldn't repay. I won't hand her a check, he said aloud, his voice steady now. I'll give her a future. Morning light filtered softly through the thin curtains as the woman folded her baby's tiny clothes at the small table near the window. Each piece passed through her hands slowly, carefully, as if she were trying to steady her thoughts. On the blanket beside her, her baby lay happily chewing on a rubber toy, unaware of how close her world was to changing. The night before still felt unreal. The biker, his daughter, the quiet help that hadn't asked for anything in return. Then, a knock at the door. She froze. No one ever came this early. Her first instinct was caution. She glanced at her baby, then moved toward the door. "Who is it?" she asked. "It's me," a familiar, calm voice replied. "From last night." She opened the door slowly. He stood there in his black leather jacket, helmet tucked under one arm. Beside him was his daughter, holding his hand tightly. The little girl smiled the moment she saw the baby, her eyes lighting up. The woman blinked in surprise. You're here?" He nodded slightly. "If you don't mind, we need to go to the Veteran Support Center today." Her brows pulled together in confusion. "The support center? Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached inside his jacket and pulled out an old envelope. The paper was yellowed, its edges worn, folded and unfolded many times over the years. He held it out to her. "Please," he said gently, "read this first." She hesitated, then took the envelope. "What is it?" "The truth," he replied. "A part of it, at least." She stepped back, letting them in. Sitting down on the edge of the couch, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As she read, her breathing changed. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Halfway through, her eyes filled with tears. This is my grandfather's name," she whispered, looking up at him. "Sergeant Whitmore." He nodded. "He saved my father's life during the war. This letter was written afterward." She covered her mouth, shaking her head slowly. "He never told me," she said. "He never said a word." "Men like him rarely do," the biker replied quietly. "They just do what needs to be done and move on." The room fell silent. The baby let out a soft giggle as the little girl knelt beside her, trying to make her laugh. "I didn't come here to repay a favor," he said firmly, "and I didn't come to offer charity." She looked up at him, eyes red. "Then why?" "Because the opportunity my family had exists because of your grandfather," he said. "And now there's a chance for you to have one, too." She swallowed hard. "I don't want anything just because of a name." "You're not getting anything because of a name," he answered immediately. "You're getting a door opened. What you do after that is up to you." She looked down at her baby, then back at the letter in her hands. "And if I say no?" He gave a small, honest smile. "Then you're still strong, still capable. But if you say yes, your daughter might never have to stand in a grocery line choosing between dignity and milk." Her breath caught. Slowly, she stood up, holding her baby close. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll go." Relief flickered across his face, but no triumph, only respect. They walked down the narrow stairs together, footsteps echoing softly. Outside, the air was cold but clear. She felt fear tightening her chest, but beneath it was something unfamiliar. Hope. Not borrowed, not begged for, earned. And as they drove toward the Veteran Support Center, the letter rested in her lap, no longer just a memory of the past, but a bridge to the future. The car came to a stop in front of the Veteran Support Center, and the woman instinctively tightened her hold. Her baby was pressed against her chest, warm, safe, and completely unaware of how close her life was to changing. Through the glass doors, the building looked modest. No grand signs, no noise, just framed photographs on the walls, men and women in uniform, watching silently like witnesses from another time. The biker stepped out first and walked around to open her door. "Just one step inside," he said gently. "The rest will take care of itself." She nodded and went in. The air inside carried the quiet scent of paper, coffee, and something older, time itself. The receptionist smiled as they approached. "Your name?" She said it. The woman checked a file, paused, then smiled more warmly. "Yes," she said. "We've been expecting you." Her heart skipped. Expecting? The biker stopped a step behind her on purpose. This moment wasn't his. It had to be hers. The conference room was small but bright. A few chairs around a table. Sunlight slipped through the window in a thin golden line. She sat carefully on the edge of her chair, adjusting her baby in her arms, back straight, fully present. The woman across from her opened the folder. "We reviewed your application again," she said calmly. "Your job history is short, but consistent. You kept going. You didn't quit." The woman lowered her eyes. "I only did what I could." That's exactly what we were looking for, the woman replied. This program isn't about temporary help. It's about creating a path, training, responsibility, and room to grow. The woman's fingers trembled slightly. And me? You are the first candidate, came the answer, in honor of your grandfather and the legacy he left behind. The word legacy lingered in the air. I'm not asking for special treatment, she said quickly. I just want to work. The woman smiled and closed the folder. That's exactly what we're offering. Work and trust. The papers were slid across the table. Dates, responsibilities, training hours. She read every line carefully, afraid something might disappear if she didn't. At the bottom was a space for her signature. She held the pen for a moment. Then she signed. Something heavy lifted inside her chest. The first day. A few days later, she stood in front of the mirror early in the morning. Simple clothes, hair neatly tied, a seriousness in her eyes that came with responsibility. She kissed her baby's forehead. Today is Mama's first day, she whispered. Wish me luck. The office was overwhelming at first. New files, new names, new expectations. But she listened carefully, took notes, asked questions. Every hour reminded her this wasn't just a job. It was trust. By evening, her body ached. Her mind was tired, but her heart felt steady. At home, she slipped off her shoes, picked up her baby, and sat on the couch. She let out a long breath as if the whole day left her in that moment. Then, a knock at the door. She opened it to find the biker standing there, his leather jacket dusted with cold air. His daughter stood beside him, holding a small bag. We just came to see how your day went, he said quietly. Inside, the two girls recognized each other instantly. Within moments, they were sitting on the floor playing, laughter, toys, and the kind of freedom only children have. How was it? He asked. Hard, she smiled, but good. For the first time, it felt like I was moving forward. He nodded. That was enough. As the girls played, his daughter suddenly stood and walked over to her. She looked up, hesitant but honest. You're very kind, she said softly. Can I call you Mommy? Because I don't have one. The room went silent. Tears filled the woman's eyes. She knelt and pulled the little girl into her arms. My sweet girl, she whispered, her voice shaking. You can call me whatever feels safe, but I promise you this. I'll always protect you. The child smiled, relieved. The girls returned to playing. Laughter filled the room again, warmer than any heater. At the door, as they were leaving, the biker paused. You were brave today, he said. She looked at him and nodded slowly. For the first time, she replied, I didn't feel alone. The door closed. She sat there holding her baby, tired but peaceful. This wasn't just the end of a long day. It was the beginning of a new life. Time began to do what it always does, quietly, steadily. Days started to blend together. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden miracles, just small routines that slowly stitched a life back together. Early mornings, bus rides, files stacked neatly on a desk, evenings filled with a tired body and a child's laughter waiting at home. At the office, she learned without complaint. She arrived early, listened carefully, and treated every task as if it mattered, because to her, it did. Some co-workers noticed her dedication. Some noticed her silence. And some quietly tried to figure out her story. She didn't offer explanations. Evenings often ended the same way: home, exhaustion, and sitting quietly with her baby in her arms. But some evenings were different. Some evenings came with a familiar knock at the door. The biker would arrive with his daughter. Sometimes he brought nothing at all, just time. The two girls would sit on the floor and play like it had always been this way. Their laughter filled the room, light and unguarded. Other times, they played quietly, side by side, comfortable in shared silence. In those moments, the woman didn't feel small. She didn't feel rescued. She simply felt accompanied. One evening, while playing, the little girl took the woman's hand and said softly, "Tomorrow at school, I'm going to say I have 2 mommies." The woman froze. "2?" she asked gently. The child nodded seriously. "One in the sky, and one here." The room fell quiet. The woman pulled the girl into her arms, holding her tightly. Some answers don't need words. They come as tears. The biker watched from a distance. He never rushed anything, never named anything. For him, this wasn't a plan. It was simply what felt right. At work, change came slowly, but it came. Her efforts were noticed. Small responsibilities turned into trust. One afternoon, her supervisor closed a file and said, "You have a calming presence. People feel safe talking to you." She smiled. That mattered more than praise. But where there is light, there are always shadows. She overheard whispers in the hallway. "That's the one who got the opportunity. Must have had help." She didn't respond. Truth doesn't defend itself loudly. It just keeps showing up. One night she came home late, drained. Her baby was already asleep. She sat on the couch, eyes closed, letting the weight of the day settle. And in that quiet moment, she realized something important. She wasn't fragile anymore. She was tired, but strong. There was a soft knock at the door. It was the biker, alone this time. "I just wanted to tell you," he said, "we're taking the girls to the park tomorrow, if you want to come." She smiled. "We will." The next day, sunlight filtered gently through the trees. The girls laughed on the swings, their voices floating through the park. The woman sat on a bench, watching, peace settling into her chest. The biker sat beside her. "You've changed," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No," she replied. "I'm remembering who I was." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, as she tucked her baby into bed, the little one murmured sleepily, "Mommy, everything okay?" The woman brushed her hair back gently. "Yes, my love. It is now." Outside, the sky darkened. Inside, there was light. Not the kind that flashes or demands attention, but the kind that stays. This was the season where life didn't just give her something back. It finally let her rest. That day, the office felt unusually quiet. Even the rustle of papers seemed careful. The woman sat at her desk, focused on her work, her daughter sitting close beside her, sometimes playing with her mother's scarf, sometimes watching the light through the window. Yet, inside her chest, there was a strange unease, one of those feelings that arrives without reason, but never without meaning. Near midday, her supervisor sent a message. "Please come to the conference room." She didn't panic. She closed the file, lifted her daughter into her arms, and stood up. Wherever she went, her child went with her. That was non-negotiable. Several people were already in the conference room. Files lay neatly on the table, but the looks on their faces carried questions. One woman, the same one whose whispers had been heard before, sat quietly, wearing a professional smile. The woman took a seat, her daughter on her lap, small fingers gripping her mother's sleeve, sensing the seriousness of the room. The supervisor began calmly. "We've received some concerns. It's our responsibility to clarify everything." The woman straightened. "Yes." "It's been asked whether this opportunity was given to you because of personal help from someone outside." The room fell silent. She took a breath. Her voice was steady. "No. I received this opportunity based on my application and my work. The person who helped me one night is not connected to this center and had no role in any decision." The woman across the table made a note. "Can you confirm that?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I never used anyone's name or connection. I didn't even know there was any connection to know." The supervisor flipped through the file. "The records support this." Another question followed. "Were you given any special privileges or exceptions?" "No," she answered immediately. "The same rules apply to me as to everyone else." The silence shifted. It no longer felt heavy. It felt settled. Finally, the supervisor nodded. "Thank you. This clarification is sufficient. We value transparency, and the facts are clear." The woman set her pen down. The smile remained, but the doubt in her eyes had faded. That evening, when the woman reached home, her daughter wrapped her arms around her the moment the door closed. "Mommy!" She bent down and hugged her tightly. "Everything's okay, my love." Just then, there was a knock at the door. The biker stood outside with his daughter. The moment the two girls saw each other, they ran inside laughing. Toys spread across the floor, voices filled the room, and the house felt alive. The woman and the man watched quietly. As they played, the man's daughter suddenly looked up and asked, her voice innocent and honest, "Mom, can't we all live together?" The woman's heart skipped. Before she could answer, her own daughter nodded eagerly. "Yes, then no one will be alone." The room went still, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that carries truth. The woman sat down and pulled both girls close. "Some decisions take time," she said gently, "but love is never wrong." The man looked at her, not rushing, not promising, just sincere. "I don't want to rush," he said quietly. "I just want what's right." She met his eyes and nodded. This was no longer just a story about help. It was the beginning of a family. Some decisions are never made in a single moment. They grow slowly, in shared silences, in children's laughter, in ordinary days that quietly turn into something permanent. That was how it happened for them. There were no grand promises, no pressure, just time. Evenings at the park, dinners that ended with toys on the floor, conversations that didn't need many words. The biker never rushed her. He didn't try to fix her life. He simply stayed. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that strength and happiness didn't have to cancel each other out. One evening, while both girls sat on the floor drawing pictures together, he stood nearby and spoke calmly. "I want us to live under one roof," he said. "No urgency, no force, just honesty." She looked at the children, heads bent together, crayons scattered, laughter soft and real. There was no fear left in that picture. "Yes," she said quietly. "If this home will be safe for the children, then it will be safe for me too." From that moment on, the path was clear, even if it wasn't easy. The new home wasn't large, but it was bright. Sunlight filled the rooms. Children's drawings covered the walls. The girls' bedrooms faced each other, with a small shared space in between, where toys lived and bedtime stories were told. On the first night, the girls insisted on sleeping under the same blanket. "If I get scared, I'll hold your hand," one whispered. She watched from the doorway, tears forming, not from pain, but from gratitude. A simple wedding. The wedding was small, no grand hall, no long guest list, just a few close people, quiet prayers, and flowers held by tiny hands. When the vows were spoken, both girls stood between them, one holding her scarf, the other holding his finger. This wasn't just a marriage between two people. It was a promise to become a family. "Do you accept?" "I do." The words were simple. The meaning was not. Mother and Father Time passed. One afternoon, his daughter came home from school and called out naturally, "Mom!" She froze for a second. She had never asked for that word, but her heart accepted it instantly. Days later, her own daughter took his hand and said, "Dad, will you help me with my homework?" He smiled, not with pride, but with responsibility. "Of course." Not an ending, a beginning. One night, all four of them sat together on the couch, the children squeezed in the middle, listening to a story as rain tapped softly against the windows. The house felt warm, steady, alive. She thought to herself, "I carried everything alone for so long, and now life has finally allowed me to share the weight." He looked at her. Nothing needed to be said. This was never a story about miracles. It was a story about a mother who refused to give up, a man who chose responsibility over rescue, and two children whose honesty showed the way. And so, the story didn't truly end. It became a life. Life doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it leaves a door slightly open and waits to see who has the courage to step through. This was never a story about a hero, and it was never about a miracle. It was the story of a mother who refused to give up, a man who chose responsibility over rescue, and two children who reminded the world that a home isn't built with walls. It's built with hearts. When silence walks with truth, it becomes louder than any noise. And when love comes without conditions, it changes everything. Sometimes, one honest choice is enough. If this story touched your heart, if you believe kindness still matters, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe/follow, because the next story might feel a lot like your own.